Third try's a charm. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Rethinking Education in a Classroom webinar. My name is Jeremy Booth. I am the Director of Communications at CE International, Childhood Education International, here with three very welcome and special guests who we will introduce shortly. Before we do that, though, I want to make a couple of notes. All of you who just witnessed this realize that this is now streaming on YouTube after a couple unsuccessful tries, but we've got it, we're going. That means that because it is streaming on YouTube, it will be saved there automatically, and you can return to the video later on. If you are not able to stay for the entire webinar, if you want to revisit the topic later, if you'd like to share with colleagues. Second note is that there will be a question and answer session at the end of the initial discussion that'll occur around 40 minutes into the webinar. So I do request that you hold your questions until then. We will take those questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or if you're on YouTube, we will also be monitoring the questions that come in from there. So without as you're soon going to see, the title of this webinar is Rethinking Education in the Classroom, and you may pick up right away that that title seems somewhat limiting because of the work that our panelists engage in extends often beyond what we traditionally think of the classroom. That's because it's not the classroom itself that is limited, but it is our concept of a classroom that can and should be evolved. A classroom, we often have standard ideas about what a teacher to student dynamic looks like, what the physical space should be, what the topics that are delivered in the classroom are. And we're soon going to find out that there are countless ways to revisit what that can look like and revisit what classroom learning feels like. So that is why we are here today, and that is what our guests are going to be sharing with us. So we'll start with a couple introductions with our panelists. And Connie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I am Connie Rensink. I'm the Director of Global Education and Outreach for iEARN-USA. And iEARN is the International Education and Resources Network. And at iEARN-USA, we do both virtual and physical exchanges, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But my background is that I was an elementary school teacher for 12 years, received a Global Competence Certificate through Columbia University and Asia Society, and really began to pursue this idea of global competence and integrating these global skills into how we teach. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining, Connie. Sindhuja.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. I'm Sindhuja. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Dost Education. And at Dost, we work with caregivers and the community of really young children from under-resourced backgrounds in India. And we help them in supporting child's learning right from the child's born, even before they enter traditional school. My background is in engineering and also in developing products for the developing countries. So I have a graduate degree from Berkeley where I specialized in education in international development. So looking forward to speaking with you all. So back to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Sindhuja. And last but not least, Christoph.
Yes, hello everyone. First of all, many thanks to Jeremy, to Childhood Education International for inviting me to this, I think, very, very exciting panel and important topic. My name is Christoph Neusiedl. I'm basically a consultant for what you can call alternative or holistic education projects. I came to this work mostly through my recent PhD research, which looked at existing alternatives to mainstream education in India, what is called especially unschooling or self-designed learning. So happy to talk about this a little bit more in the discussion. I've also written a book based on my research, which is called Revolutions in Learning and Education from India. And yeah, last but not least, my most recent work is with India-based NGO, which is called Project DeFi. That stands for Design Education for Yourself. So DeFi creates self-designed learning spaces across marginalized communities We equip them with laptops, internet, lots of tools, electronics, technology, and so on. And we enable everyone, especially people from underprivileged backgrounds, to create their own learning according to their own interests and needs. So looking forward to share more about this as well during our discussion.
Thank you to all of our panelists for joining. The last thing, Christoph, that you just said is enabling everyone to engage in learning. That is what we're here for, and that is why we're rethinking education. It's not simply innovating for innovation's sake. It's innovating because there are learners who are not being accessed, and there are unique ways to do that. That is not the only thing that unites our panelists. They're also united by the fact that they have either written an article or have worked directly with someone in their organization who has written an article for our magazine, Childhood Education Innovations. I want to give a huge shout out to my colleague, Ann Bauer, who 6 times a year compiles 10 to 12 original articles from innovative, pioneering minds in the education sector, and puts that together in a really beautiful layout in the magazine, Childhood Education Innovations. If you're unfamiliar with it, I encourage you to go to our website, go to the drop-down menu in the top right screen that says Publications and click on Childhood Education Innovations. And there see the most recent edition in which Christoph, actually, his article appears there. You can see a couple articles there, and then consider the subscription options. Last thing before we jump into our conversation is that the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted the need to rethink education in terms of how we access all learners and ensure that they're getting a quality, equitable learning opportunity. That is something that we at CE International have been doing for a long time. It is one of our practice areas, Rethinking Education, one of our 3 primary focuses. It is also the inspiration for all of our panelists, our magazine, and then this series, which afterwards in 2 weeks, we will be going to the second webinar in the series, looking at the community, rethinking education at the community level, and then 2 weeks after that at the country level. But first, we're going to start with the most basic level, and that is looking at what it's like for a child to learn. So we are going to begin the discussion section, and this is, I ask the viewers who are joining us to please hold their questions until we complete this discussion, because we are going to lay the groundwork for what it means to rethink education. Which leads to the first question, setting a baseline. What does rethinking education mean to you? How would you define it? And related, how does the learning process expand beyond the traditional ideas that we have related to education? And I'm going to go ahead and start again with Connie.
Thanks again. At iEARN, Rethinking Education is really about engaging students in real world learning, both through physical and virtual exchanges. And so the iEARN network is an international community. And when we come together online and when we come together in those personal exchanges, it really expands the walls and those borders of the classroom, and that space is opened up. In our physical exchanges, students experience other cultures, the perspectives, the languages firsthand. And then in iEARN projects, classrooms really connect to examine global issues both locally, but then also look at those same global issues in their partner classrooms. So they really open their minds to how that impacts the world, not just themselves personally. And simultaneously, it amplifies their ability to become change makers now.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that is a really excellent interpretation of rethinking education in practice and in theory. Sindhuja, how do you consider and practice rethinking education? What does it mean to you?
Yeah. So one of the things that comes to my mind when we say rethinking education is like really making it learner-centric. And when I say this could mean 2 things, right? Like one is like the basics, like it needs to be inclusive, like everyone has access to it. And then we really understand the needs of the learners and we design the experience around that, right? And it could just mean different things for the different contexts. All of us work in, like 3 of us here are already working in very different contexts and different age groups of learners. And the second one is like an interesting thing, which is actually making it more relatable and fun for the learner to engage in. Right. So, and then when the learning is fun, then learners do engage even more. And what this looks like for the age group that we work in is how do we transform a natural environment for a child, into something that can become more learning and exploratory. And like children in their birth to 6 years are very much in their homes and with their caregivers, parents and other adults in the home, and about like how can the support systems function in such a way that a child who's learning is able to gain those experiences in a more seamless manner. Yeah.
That's excellent, Sindhuja. I think what you say, going learner-centric, like you said, there's two parts to that. And it's making it fun is something that is just critically important. In order for you to learn, or to do anything rather, you want it to be an enjoyable experience. So putting the emphasis on that is really important. And I think it does break away from that traditional idea of a lot of people who look at education. I think sometimes we get caught up in what the topics are that are being taught rather than what the experience of the learner is. So thank you for sharing that. Christoph.
Yeah, I think I can just agree also with what Sindhuja said about rethinking education means thinking more, much more learner-centric. So to me, basically, rethinking education first and foremost means then to challenge and to really overcome the boundaries of the mainstream education system, which is basically what Project DeFi with our self-designed learning centers is doing, which are fairly outside the mainstream system. Why I'm saying this is because I feel that education should be and really can be much more than what it is today. And by that, I mean, it should be much more than, let's say, a globally standardized, uniform, top-down approach, which in many cases just has as a goal to basically make students into productive workers according to the current market demands. So instead, I feel this should be really about giving agency back to the learner, which means enabling each individual to learn more about themselves, their local surroundings, and the world at large. And it should really give each individual learner the opportunity to discover their own interests, their own talents and skills, and develop those, and also do that in depth. And I feel that is what is to a large degree missing in the current system we have.
Excellent. Obviously all three unique answers. However, there was a common thread about putting the emphasis on the learner. And I think that is really crucial and something that we're seeing an increasing emphasis on, but it never is sufficient to continue to say it. We always need to look at that in a variety of ways. And I am happy to see in the audience that we have some people sharing their interpretations as well. So I encourage you, rethinking education can be done in a large variety of ways. And Flor Morgan seems to agree a lot with Connie that belonging to a global movement is priority. It should be a priority anyway. We're all in this together, and I agree with that as well. So we have set a baseline for rethinking education. And again, this is the purpose of that, is that it's not necessarily that we just want to inherently, tear down all of the ideas just because it needs to happen because we're rebellious. It's because an innovative mindset is crucial to advance with the times, to really address the issues that are present. And speaking of that transitions into the second question for each of you, that when you look at a really local level and what inspired you to come up with the innovation and the innovative work that you really focus on, what were the challenges that you were witnessing that inspired the innovation, and how is that an example of rethinking education? So change up the order a little bit and start with Sindhuja this time.
Yeah. So to recap what we do at Dost Educations, we work with low-income Indian families, so especially parents of children from the years birth to 6, and we help them in supporting their children get school ready or like get ready to learn. And what that means, what we saw, like the reason we began this work is because there's just so much research about how children start learning even before they're born and how development starts happening. Brain development is at its highest, and it's really good to leverage the early years. But again, we are also faced with the reality that low-income parents who haven't been to school themselves or haven't had any of those experiences of them growing up really are unable to provide those experiences, learning experiences for kids, and usually wait until age 5 or 6 when the child enters formal school, and it's already too late, and a child keeps falling behind by the time they enter school and their day one of school. So the whole idea is, how do we level the playing field for children? And this started with, I think the way we started, it started with learning begins even outside the classroom and at home. And the idea is we do a phone call based program, so which is targeted towards parents who do not have internet access. And these are parents who might be daily wage laborers or agricultural workers in rural India who have that old flip phone and can receive a phone call on it. So they register for our program through a community worker who signs them up. And then they start getting these 1 to 2 minute audio messages on activities that they can do with their child at home. So the whole idea is that they do these simple steps on a day-to-day basis and are able to build a practice of learning and curiosity and exploration at home, and are able to be a part of the child's journey, educational journey, right from the beginning, and don't feel out of place when the child enters school. Yeah.
Thank you, Sindhuja. Every time I hear about the phone cast, I get chills. I think it's such a creative, unique approach to utilize common technology, a simple flip phone that in a lot of places is you don't see very much anymore, but it can be such a resource for learners to have access. And I think that is really, really crucial that you were leveraging that. Christoph, what was the inspiration behind the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think when I just saw this question, what immediately came in my mind was the story actually of how Project DeFi started, which was really as a small experiment. So Abhijit Sinha, who is the founder of Project DeFi, he just graduated from an engineering college a few years ago. He started a more or less boring office job, and at some point then he realized, okay, that is not what he wants to do maybe for the rest of his life. So he decided to quit, take some time off, and he moved to a village outside of Bangalore here in India. And he spent a lot of time in that village at the local tea shop. He always had his phone, his laptop with him, and that created a lot of curiosity among the children, and they kept on bothering him about can they use the laptop and so on. And at one point he just had to give in to them, and he gave them the laptop. And what surprised him was that basically without having ever accessed the laptop, without knowing English language in which the laptop was set, the children had just very easily figured out how to navigate online, how to use the laptop, how to download and play games, and so on. And from that, he was basically thinking, okay, what actually happens if you give people just access to resources and access to a platform where they can do whatever they are interested in, whatever they want to do. And that is actually how DeFi and the MOOC model of self-designed learning started. So he just rented out a small space, put in a few things, tools, electronics, other materials, and everyone in the community who wanted to come could come, and soon this became the most happening place in that village, and people started to experiment, try out new things, and so on. And what I just want to end with that story is basically my key takeaway from that is that it just shows that people are equally intelligent. Now, what that means is basically, I'm not saying everyone can score the same test results or every one of us can become a rocket scientist, but basically all of us have the basic capacity to talk to each other and with each other, to reason with each other, to understand each other, and based on that, make decision. And based on that, we can understand our local surroundings. We can make sense on our own of what is the life we want to live, and so on. And basically this idea, everyone is equally capable, everyone is equally intelligent, still is the premise that we have at Project DeFi, and the premise which we apply with all our learners who are coming to our centers.
Yes, absolutely. And we're seeing children are also generally very receptive. And I think what you mentioned there is that the challenge that you saw if you look at it from far away, agency and learning seems like a really impossible challenge to address. But the work at Project Defy really thought critically about how to change that, because it's even the idea of giving child agency and what they learn goes against some of the traditional approaches in education that is dictated by a curriculum or the teachers or school administration or government. And this Project Defy turns that on its head, and it's the children have every right and every ability to determine what it is that they can and would like to learn. And we see the results of what happens when you shift that priority. So Connie, going over to you, what inspired you to get involved in iEARN and global competency, and what were the challenges that helps address?
So I'm also going to go back to kind of our founding story. And in 1988, there was a partnership between classes in New York City and Moscow, Russia, in the height of the Cold War, really trying to cross those barriers at that time and create friendships in that cold environment, if you will, with the thought of preventing nuclear war, honestly, at that time. Fast forward to today, and we're in 140 countries worldwide, and classrooms partner with classrooms across the world to do project-based learning around global issues. And so we have projects like Girl Rising or Earth Stewardship, but also some that are day in the life where they really build empathy and getting to know each other well. All of our focus now then kind of leads into this whole child, if you will, and global competencies have been called out as soft skills. We tend to think of them as essential power skills in today's world, and those include communication across a different audience, having respect for each other's cultures and perspectives, taking collaborative action. So not just learning, but then what are we doing about it, right? And caring for each other and the planet. And so we think of this not as one more thing in the classroom, but how we do what we do in the classroom to build those skills. And it really is, again, looking at what is going to make them successful in today's interconnected world. And this is important for students and educators and adults alike.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the soft skills, because as soon as you said teaching empathy, I could hear some more traditional educator or education minds thinking that, why would you prioritize such a soft skill? And I agree. It can be what it is it can create a baseline for some of those other skills that we want to emphasize so much by being able to relate to other cultures, to other individuals. You do set the tone for everything else that can be exchanged in the learning environment. So I was really happy to hear you say that, because I agree. I think empathy is a very powerful skill. And then as a communicator myself, communication, I can't agree more that it is essential. So we're going to look then, we got a couple origin stories there about how this started, but then obviously your work has evolved since then. And I'm curious to know, particularly for the viewers who are looking here or who are viewing, may be working on innovations themselves and maybe trying to think about how to extend the impact of such innovation into other spaces. So how are you able to accomplish that, taking the innovative approaches that you pioneer and that you work with? How do you expand them to within the school, within a community, and beyond? Generally, just how do you enlist other stakeholders in embracing a new idea or approach that may come across as just completely foreign to them? So this time I will turn first to Christoph.
Thank you. Yeah, so talking about our NUC model of self-designed learning, our learning spaces, they have already spread to a number of countries. We have now 16 spaces which are spread across India, Bangladesh, Rwanda, and Zimbabwe, soon also in Uganda and other places. And we are also looking continuously to expand to more countries and to new countries also. Most importantly for us is that we work, first of all, very closely with a local implementing organization. So we are not just going randomly into any community and say, hey, we are opening up a learning center now, but actually we are looking to team up with organizations at best grassroots organizations who have done a lot of work in that community, who know that NUC is something that can benefit the local community. And of course, whenever we open up a new NUC, this is a pretty new idea for everyone and a new concept, right? And so what we try to do is to involve as many people as possible, right, from the start. Initially, this means especially talking to community leaders and starting a discussion about, okay, what is the education scenario in your local community? What can a NUC offer you that maybe a school-based education can't offer you? How can it benefit the local community? And most important there is also, I think, to lay out the need that we really need an alternative or a complementary approach to school-based education. So as a young organization, most of our centers are maybe 2 to 3 years old or younger. What we often get asked is about what is your proof of concept, what is your evidence, and so on. And of course, we gather that evidence as we go along and we provide that, but this is a sort of continuous process, and it takes a while till you show a lot of long-term evidence. But what we say, or what I say at least, is that just because you don't have the ultimate proof that something is absolutely and perfectly working, that doesn't mean we should just keep things as they are. There is really plenty of evidence that the current model of education has a lot of shortcomings, a lot of failures. And so what we are offering is an alternative that has the potential to improve people's life, and we're trying to highlight this by looking at individual learner stories, and by really showing to everyone in a very transparent manner what is actually happening in our learning centers. So for instance, we have a learning cycle which is 3 months long. So across those 3 months, the learners following their own learning goals, their own learning projects. And at the end of that, we always have a huge community event, almost a festival kind of thing, where we really invite everyone from the community, parents of the learners, but everyone really who wants to come to look and see what have the learners done across those 3 months, what kind of products have they designed, what kind of skills have they acquired. And that is really the best evidence, I would say, to gather the acceptance of everyone, just by showing that, okay, what is the concrete impact in your local community?
So not only are you getting creative with rethinking what learning looks like, you're rethinking evidence as well, and highlighting by giving everyone concrete examples, like this is what is happening, this is what our learners are enjoying, what they like to do. I think that's brilliant. And I agree that, well, with essentially everything you just said, it's particularly how you said that it's, even if we may not have the same sort of evidence that some of the, existing standard learning models provide, there's also plenty of evidence with those same learning models that there are shortcomings, and we need to allow innovative approaches the time to accumulate that evidence that we are desiring for those learning outcomes. So in total agreement. Connie.
There are a couple of ways that we're working on scaling now. One of them is partnering with schools specifically and building cohorts of teachers to support them in their capacity to facilitate student-centered project-based learning. And so to shift to that guide on the side where students take the ownership of their learning and really working with them. And so the other piece of that is professional development for teachers. And so we've developed some training that is available for people all across the world. And we also have some workshops that we're running throughout. There's one coming up in November on how to become a global educator. And it's really looking at the teacher themselves and their global competence skills, if you will. But we do know that sometimes there are those who are saying, why should we teach those soft skills, or why should that be in there? What we are finding is that teachers are telling us, and through our post-project surveys, we're seeing that kids are much more engaged in this learning. They're excited to be thinking about real-world application and communicating with their international partners. And so parents get really excited when kids are excited. We're finding PTAs, we're finding some education foundations that are sponsoring classrooms and groups to be part of our projects. And then also thinking about this as we've talked with teachers and done those post-project surveys, students are saying that their communication skills are improving. Teachers are telling us that their writing scores are going up. And so we can see some of that proof in the pudding, if you will, of what are the outcomes. Then I want to go to just the bigger, larger scale. And big business leaders are telling us that these global skills are what are lacking in today's workforce. And so we reiterate that these are sorely needed. And so having this experience is preparing them for college readiness, for job readiness, which we all know are key phrases in the education world of, the goals that we're all trying to hit and what we want for our students for our future. So thinking about those things collectively, it's just really how can engaging with our global projects that have alignment with academia, but also have alignment with these global skills really help develop our students for the future.
And I think what you just said emphasizes how you said this is all aligned. Education, every example that you said is the professional development, job readiness. Those are all different interpretations of learning. They are learning in its core. It's when you become an adult, suddenly, learning is no longer, you don't think of a classroom, it becomes professional development, but that's another form of learning. And I think you notice that professionals, adults never cease to want to learn. And so by tapping into that, that's a really excellent avenue for convincing potentially skeptical stakeholders into embracing a new approach. Sindhuja, how have you expanded this work into other areas?
Yeah. So when we first launched in 2017. And when we did that, it was a small group of about 100 to 200 parents in a community in the outskirts of Delhi in India. And from there, right now, we reach about 90,000 caregivers, and who in turn have about 140 to 150,000 children in the families. Right. And I think some of the key things that we've learned in this process is, since the way we reach, the medium through which we reach parents is through technology, it's like easier to scale from a technology standpoint, but then a lot of it is building that trust with the community, building the trust with the caregiver and other stakeholders that are involved, that this is not something, that this is something that they need, and that's something that's going to help them. Right, because the prevalent practice, or that's one of the challenges that's been there for us, is rote learning is very prevalent. So as soon as like a child turns 3, they might be learning their ABCs, their rhymes, and their 1, 2, 3s, and there's a very different approach to learning. And when you have an alternate approach to learning, it's not usually considered learning, or it's considered a waste of time, to be really frank. Right. So I think that's the mindset that we are trying to work with, and we are engaging with, let's say, preschool teachers, because then it's like Connie mentioned, soft skills, quote unquote, are also the ones that are difficult to measure, especially in young learners. So it kind of all comes back to evidence, because you need to see the value in it. And literacy and numeracy and writing your letters are easier to measure through standard tests. So I think it's a lot about how do you actually tackle these challenges. And so some of the things we've done are like worked with experts and like relied on research. So we do work with experts from the Harvard Center for Early Childhood. We work with UNICEF for implementing our programs in about 5 states in India. So these are some, and then the other thing is we also make sure we do have that one-on-one connection with a preschool teacher in the community, to make sure they are bought into this process, and also like in turn the caregivers are bought into the process as well. So it's kind of, I feel like there are common threads in the things that we've spoken with, like trust, and then there's the evidence building, and in terms of like scaling large, right? Because this problem, there are so many millions of families, and when we think about that, like the evidence and being able to take the research along and being able to prove that is going to really help as we look forward to scaling to more and more families. Yeah.
Absolutely. And another common thread that carried out through all the answers was the community, and inviting communities to be involved in this and giving them the agency to embrace a new idea. In Christoph's case, he mentioned showing the community's results, it's showcasing those, and that inspires other communities as well who, you know, feel some sort of connection to embrace it as well. It's not being forced upon them. It's being presented as an opportunity for them to be more involved in this process, whereas previously that may not have been the case. We have one last question before we move to the audience, and that is a timely topic looking at the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously impacted education on a massive scale worldwide. But we want to know what kind of lessons educators can take from that impact. Have any of you found a silver lining to the situation? And then, somewhat separately but related, how has your innovation adapted to the pandemic? So we'll start back again with Connie this time.
So the silver lining for us is that teachers and students have gotten much more comfortable with virtual communication. Educators are much more open and actually eager for looking for hands-on learning experiences and opportunities and ways to connect students with each other and to be able to have them work from home. Our iEARN educators are telling us that one of my favorite stories most recently was a teacher who told me that there was a class in India who isn't on the same timeline as her class in the US. And so they finished for their summer break, and it was time to do the display or sharing of the project in the summer. So she invited her 40 students, and 30 of them on their summer break showed up for this wonderful exchange because they bought in, that they really felt and saw the value of the connection. We've been fine-tuning our onboarding processes to help classrooms get connected more quickly and easily. Our project facilitators have adapted projects so that students can connect and participate from home, and that it is not something that has to be done in a classroom. And we've had a few projects that specifically have given students a chance to really share their experiences related to the pandemic in a creative way, and also really address those social emotional needs, because those teachers saw that that was really a critical need at that time. And I think where we talk now is just to let's not go backwards. And as the world moves, and fingers crossed, as we move to a solution and a time when we can be in person again, that we don't lose those connections that we can do online.
Absolutely, and the skills that come with it. It does represent an entirely different skill set and approach. All right, Sindhuja.
Yeah. So I think the silver lining, if at all, is I feel it's one of those experiences where everyone in the world felt it at the same time. And I think it's just like rare something like this happens. Like, I hope something bad doesn't happen. Like, maybe there are good experiences we all feel at the same time in the future. But this is actually given a momentum, if not because like the traditional classroom was shut and all of us were looking for alternate ways of learning. And I feel earlier it's been happening in pockets, and now it's like the whole world is trying to figure out how can learning happen while the traditional methods out of the way for the time being. So I think one of the things that we saw was the top problems that families and learners presented over and over again was the mental stress, and that was there even before. Like, no one could think, hey, I'm not able to go to school, because they're like they're stressed to think of like about more immediate things. And that kind of actually presented itself as a big challenge to overcome to even then get to education. So I feel it's been mental well-being of learners and like caregivers and families has come up as like a big area to address. And I feel like it's kind of an opportunity for us to take this thing forward and continue the conversation on this and see how it can be integrated into like learning and education. I think all of us have been speaking about socio-emotional learning. Mental well-being as part of learning is also something that needs to be taken into account. That's something we've seen. And like Connie mentioned, people are more open to virtual methods of learning, and in places where we work, internet access is not easy to come by. So also thinking about what does access to these new methods of learning mean is also something a lot of us are asking questions about that. And how do we maintain inclusion, or how do we increase the inclusion as we get into these new innovative approaches of how learning can look like, right? So these are some of the things. And I think to just like quote something from one of our caregivers is like, hey, I was able to provide some experience or the other, like, and was actually able to form a stronger bond with my child because I'm able to provide some learning experience for my child and do some activities at home. I think that was just heartening to hear, considering like the child was not going to preschool at home and was really stressed. So I think there have been like some little moments of joy in the midst of the other things. Yeah.
Thanks, Sindhuja. Yes, like you mentioned, there is a common thread, at least from the first two answers regarding mental health, that is critical. And I think it was a conversation that may not have been as open previously. And we're starting to see in some areas that is becoming the case as people become more in tune and open to considering those factors. And I also want to acknowledge one of your points about the technology, access to technology in some areas simply isn't where it can be in order to embrace some of the technological adaptations. And that is obviously a primary focus for the learning community or the education community. We need to ensure that all of these learners do have access. And I think perhaps what you said about all of us being in this together and recognizing what it was like. Sometimes for some people in the world, it was the first time that they simply could not go to school. That's not the reality for a lot of learners worldwide. And so being able to empathize with that situation for the first time, hopefully adds a little more urgency to the topic of opening up access. I agree with you completely. And last but not least, Christoph.
So in answering that question, I think I want to connect a little bit with what Sindhuja has said in the previous question when she talked about how we need to broaden our understanding of what actually entails meaningful and useful education. And in that aspect, I'm afraid I don't have so much silver lining as maybe a missed opportunity, because what I have seen mostly is that unfortunately, when all the lockdown started, what people, especially parents, started to panic about is that thinking that as soon as their kids are outside or step outside of the classroom, learning and education just somewhat mysteriously, somewhat automatically just simply stops. And this wrong mindset, I think, is really taking away a lot of opportunities from young people during those lockdowns. So instead of worrying what we do without teachers what we do without teachers and textbooks, the time during the lockdowns could have really been spent much more useful and productive to learn new skills at home, to do something with family and friends where possible, and so on. I'm aware there are also many limitations, but there is really much more that could have been done. And the reason why this hasn't happened is basically because we are so stuck on thinking that, okay, education is mostly about memorizing stuff from textbooks, what the teacher says, and performing well at exams. And we don't really realize what learning and education really means and what it all entails. And this includes even school-based knowledge that could be learned in many other ways than just going to the classroom or being inside the classroom. And so what we have done at Project DeFi during the times of the pandemic was basically we started a phone-based program, because also in our case, the learners we had, they didn't have access to laptops, phones in many cases, and to any kind of high-speed internet access. So that was not an option for us. So we went back also to phone-based programs where we had weekly phone calls with learners and their whole families. We not only got into, okay, what can you do at home? What can you learn together as a family? But we also discussed with them, okay, how are you doing in that current situation during the pandemic? we discussed some stereotypes, some stigmas that are out there, and how to deal with that whole situation. And the feedback we got from families was not only did they learn a lot, like everyone in the family suggested some skills they wanted to try out, from the 10-year-old child to the 80-year-old grandmother, but also they were just genuinely happy that someone cared about them and asked them, how are you coping with everything? How are you dealing with all this, right? Mental health, like we said, is a big issue. And they were telling us there's no one else who actually has asked us those questions. So again, combining, I think, learning and skilling with awareness on COVID with mental health is what we have tried to do. And now we are reducing our phone-based programs as the pandemic, at least for the moment, seems to be a bit on the lower level. And so we have started to open our learning centers again. But of course, with limited numbers of learners. So it's all a bit more regulated to what time, at what times, which learners are coming to the NUC, social distancing, mask wearing, and so on. So it's not the experience we would love the learners to have, the full experience, but it's getting back to some sort of normal.
And as we get back to normal, I'm encouraged, or some sort of normal, I'm encouraged by the work that the three of you are doing to ensure that we don't simply go back to normal, the precedent where there were so many learners who are not being accessed. I think your point about being a missed opportunity is, there's a comment in the chat that recognizes this as well. And in many instances, the digital divide was worsened. And we simply don't want our individual, or maybe the people who surround us, our priority to get back to something that is recognizable and comfortable, to block out the fact that there are many whose return to normal will not allow them to have the same opportunities that some of us have. And that is really, really critical. And I appreciate you acknowledging that. So that is it for my questions. And now I would like to transition into the questions, any questions that the audience has. Please do so, please submit them. I see a lot of people are using the chat, but please submit them in the question and answer box at the bottom. Or if you're viewing on YouTube, you can do so in the chat, and my colleagues are monitoring that and can share with me as well. The first question that is, I'm going to also combine this a little bit with a comment in the chat that it's regarding students who are at risk. So slow learners, learners with mental disabilities. How can we address that topic and engage them in new ways to ensure that they have equal access, equal opportunity? I know that's not strictly any of your, that may not be a focus, but I know that all of your programs probably do touch learners who have some sort of disability or inability to connect in an equal way. So does anyone have any thoughts about how to increase access and opportunity for such learners? And feel free, anyone, to address that.
Well, I just wanted to call out that our iEARN projects are open to everyone, and we have classes. I know of a couple across the US and several across the world where there are learners that are disabled learners that are actually participating with those projects, and there are different ways for them to engage. And so differentiation to me is what comes to mind. And just making sure that that access is open and available, and that the supports are there. In our videos, we're beginning to add captioning, things like that, so that there's just the awareness and the support.
Absolutely.
To add to what Connie was saying, like in our context, what this looks like is since our primary interaction is with the caregivers, like some of the questions that caregivers have asked us is, hey, I have a young child, 2 to 3-year-old, who seems to be struggling with some kind of an inability, or but at the same time, these are the kind of questions we get, but at the same time, the caregivers are also overcoming a taboo. They are unsure. They don't want to still put a finger on it. So some of the things that we do here are actually connect them with expert counselors who can speak with them and also provide them the support. So as Connie mentioned, this is making support, making options or opportunities, ample opportunities available for caregivers to connect with us and have raise any issues or concerns that they may have, and also connecting them with the experts necessary to have a deeper conversation with them, because it's also something that we recognize we're not experts in, but then there are other people who are focused in this work. So that's something how, like, it's an example of how it plays out in the context we work in.
Yeah, and maybe what I can add, so in our case, what we're trying to make sure is, first of all of our spaces are freely and easily accessible for people with impairments, which in the countries we work with is still a big issue, that even mainstream schools and so on are not really easily accessible for people with impairments. So we're trying wherever it's possible, at least enable access to the space. Also, once we get learners with disabilities or with impairments, what we're trying to do is to not single them out and keep them in separate groups or something, but have them. So all our projects are basically group-based projects in small groups, 3 to 5 learners and so on. So integrate them into groups with others, let them work together, so that there's also not a sense of singling out people, but actually enabling them to have a common, a shared experience. And many people who haven't met any persons with disabilities actually also change their views on them. They don't think, hey, they are not capable of doing anything, but they actually see they have a lot of potential, as much potential as I have myself. And so enabling those learning experiences, those shared experiences, I think is something very important.
Absolutely. Again, that kind of gets back to the topic of empathy that we talked about earlier, and that is at the root of the Rethinking Education. Educating in empathy is very crucial for a lot, as a baseline for a lot of the other lessons, and in inclusion particularly. So that is a good reminder that the topic of the webinar is Rethinking Education, and we want to ensure that the questions and the answers do revolve primarily around that, so that we are thinking about embracing this sort of mindset that allows for a greater or more appropriate solutions for specific problems. That is what brings us all together. So I do think there is one large challenge that is being brought up in the chat that I want to acknowledge, and it's climate change. And I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts about how rethinking education can be related to that. How can we involve all learners in the concept, or in the efforts to mitigate climate change? I think that is a really pressing topic that would be relevant for everyone. So would anyone like to start with that?
Yeah, I can go first. I think one of the things is at least having a basic understanding and connection of the environment we live in. Right, so I think like the work we do at the moment is we do have specific modules about how a child can feel connected with the environment, their natural environment, and like how it's more about the oneness with it, and how it's not about the human-centered way of thinking, but as us being a component of the environment we are in. And so we do have some of the ways we are tackling it's just a small part of the entire global issue that exists, but at least building awareness right from a young age about the environment is a mini step that we take. And I think like this can be done in multiple ways, and showing how individual behaviors contribute to climate change and how we can avoid, like reduce our impact, negative impact on that, is something that comes to my mind about how we can do this with learners of different ages.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sindhuja.
Yeah. If I can continue, so what I think is that rethinking education is never something that is just closed or separated from anything else, right? Education has a huge multiplier effect. So if we rethink education, I think at the same time, what we are rethinking is also development and the mainstream development model, which is really the main cause for the situation we are in, for climate change and the many inequalities we are facing. So let's say that I've said this before when we talked about the modern education system, which is mostly focused on integrating people into pre-assigned roles of what kind of jobs that are out there. But what we are doing, what we're trying to do by rethinking education is basically giving everyone the opportunity to find out what are the skills that I have and how do I want to use them. And if you empower people to actually do that, if you give them the power to take learning into their own hands, what they are capable of is also creating different new and alternative livelihoods for themselves. Of course, this is a very long-term process, but I do believe that this is a very essential part, because once people are able to choose their own livelihoods, I'm pretty sure not many people would choose something that is destroying their local environment, that is a job that contributes to economic growth, but not to any meaningfulness in their lives and so on. So if people are more in charge of their learning, and that is what, for me, rethinking education is all about, then also we get a chance to rethink that development model that we are currently part of.
I would echo what Christoph's talking about, and I'm going to take it kind of to a different strand of it's giving students the opportunity to explore the issues. And so all of our projects have to answer the question, how does this improve life on our planet? That is just core to our thoughts. But we have some around climate change, water is life, the earth stewardship that I mentioned already. But it is giving students information and then letting them explore how that impacts them locally, how it's impacting the world, and really giving them that awareness. I don't like the word empowerment with students. To me, it's more engagement and amplification, because they already have the skills and they already have that inherent trait that I would say Christoph's talking about, is that they have the tools within them. It's now just giving them the channel to be able to express that. And that's where I think we have to work, so that students understand that it impacts them, that it impacts the world. And that's also another piece that has come with COVID, is us really understanding that interconnectedness of all of us in our world. And I think that can only benefit as we continue to share that.
Absolutely. A lot of what was just shared, I think, comes back down to agency and just in empowering the individual and making them feel confident and comfortable in knowing that there is actions that they can take. And then when you combine them in an interconnected way, that can have the broader impact that we see. We are we're at the originally scheduled time, but there is one question that I would like to close with from the audience. And I apologize to the other questions that we were not able to address. There will be a survey that goes out automatically at the end of this, that you are able to share your questions there. But to wrap up the theme of rethinking education, I'm going to read this word for word from Michelle Heno. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Thank you for sharing these wonderful programs. Involving the community and focusing on professional development are important aspects of getting the message that alternative programs work. Evidence is key, but still, there may be people who refuse to come on board. Regarding convincing the community, are there obstacles that you feel you are still struggling to overcome, or are you always able to communicate your program successfully? So I turn that over to whoever would like to start.
So what I think is what we see based on our experience, the biggest issues we are facing is really the first buy-in once we start a new learning center, and then a lot of school-going children, teenagers will also come, and all of a sudden the parents are getting worried that why are they spending so much time there instead of doing their homework, instead of doing tuition, going for tuition classes, and so on. And I feel there's only so much you can do. You can't also just completely ignore their worries, and you have to acknowledge them, and you can explain them in detail. Okay, how does our model work? How is it beneficial for the community? And we try to invite them over to the learning centers and actually see for themselves, okay, what is happening. And we also invite them and ask them, hey, do you have any skills that you want to share in our learning centers? Maybe we can organize a workshop, maybe we can organize a session. And that often makes people look differently at our learning centers, and they feel like, okay, I can also contribute to it. And but if all of that still doesn't help, what usually helps is that at least after those first 3 months, when the learners have developed their projects, when they have achieved their goals, that often parents come to us and they will tell us how surprised they are that they see the commitment in their children, the commitment that they didn't have before when it comes to school, when they really wanted to achieve something, and how much efforts they are putting into it. Many parents also call it or are surprised how disciplined the children all of a sudden are. And then they realize that, okay, what they have done here actually is they have developed some real life projects, some hands-on projects, and they have actually come up with something. And that is mostly that effect, and to see that those real life examples of what they have achieved is what I feel convinces most of people who are skeptical. But yeah, getting there, especially since there is still not so much public acceptance for alternative or holistic education out there, is a bit of a struggle, definitely.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. I could maybe add some 15 seconds to it. So I think one of the things that this just rings a bell so much, because just earlier in the day, we were having a brainstorming session within the team on this exact challenge on how do we overcome challenges on acceptance or openness to alternate methods of learning. And one of the things that we kept coming back to was it's going to take time. And the second one is the trust. And the other thing is, whenever there is a new thing, there's always going to be early adopters within a community who are going to come gravitate towards it and pick it up. And from there, it's about us providing spaces for them to communicate their stories and successes, so the rest of them can slowly start taking it up, right? So that's kind of something that we go back in. It just looks in different shapes and forms when you see it, but this is kind of how we think about what that looks like within a community and how we can overcome challenges coming in from the outside.
I would echo what Sindhuja was just talking about. It's telling the story. It's also backing that story up with data. And so there is that combination of both. And so you have to have the statistics, you have to do the post-project surveys, et cetera, and have that information to come back. But it's not enough to have the data. You also need to have the meaningful story that evidences what the impact is overall on the community, on the child. And I would say there is a momentum I have seen in the last 5-10 years on global competence. Particularly, we've seen that with OECD and the measurement this last year. But it is, what does that translate to in the learning education community, so that they don't feel like it's one more thing that they have to do, but it's how they integrate, and it's critical for their learning.
So it sounds like that specific challenge maybe boils down to two things: time and trust, which both can be overcome with patience and determination, but it, again, will take time and trust. So it is amazing what all of you have done to take your programs and your innovations to the level that they go. I think we can all agree that we hope to see it continue to grow, because I love everything that you're doing in terms of rethinking education. So for that, I want to thank all of you for joining us, Christoph, Connie, and Sindhuja. It was really a wonderful experience sharing with you. I want to give you the opportunity to briefly share information, point the viewers to your work if you would like, and the latest information that is coming out of your organization. So Connie?
The easiest way to find us is to go to our website, and I've just put that in the chat. So I invite you to come look at us at iEARN-USA.org.
The same, let me type down my website on the chat, and you can find the link to our different social media handles there and follow us. You'll hear updates as and when they happen.
Yeah, I shall do the same website, plus you find us on Facebook, Instagram, Project Defy. And if you're in India, Bangladesh, or one of the other countries where we are, do look at our website, see where our learning centers are, and everyone is most welcome to come there. With COVID, of course, a little bit more difficult, but once you contact us, we can definitely schedule for a visit at one of our learning centers.
If I can follow up, I would also invite everyone to go look at the articles that we have all written for the magazine, because it really explains our work.
Thank you, Connie. That is wonderful. Thank you again to our panelists. Your work is inspiring, not only because it is looking at education in an innovative way. The whole purpose is to expand equal opportunities for learners worldwide, and that is very critically important. Thank you to our viewers. As a reminder, this is streaming on YouTube, so it will be on our YouTube channel if you search Childhood Education International in YouTube, and you can access that at any time. When you close this browser, there will be a brief survey, and it'll also go out by email. We would appreciate it if you do share your thoughts with us, because this is the first of 3 webinars. In 2 weeks' time, we'll look at rethinking education in the community, and then 2 weeks after that, rethinking education in the country. And for the second one, you can already subscribe, or rather register. My colleague will drop that link in the chat. And for more updates from Childhood Education International, I encourage you to go to our website, ceinternational1892.org. Scroll to the very bottom of the page and click Receive Updates. That will provide updates about the series of webinars and any other events or information of importance. So one last time, thank you again, and everyone, please take care and stay safe.
Thanks also to
Thank
everyone.
you for
Bye.
having us. Bye-bye.